Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Nolene Duff and I'm the Chair of the Panel of Administrators here at the City of Casey, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Council meeting of the 23rd of June 2020. I'd like to welcome all of those of you that are watching live stream, and I do note, just for reference, that in line with the restrictions imposed by the Victorian Government on public gatherings, the public gallery for this meeting is closed this afternoon. Commence with the Statement of Acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The Diversity Statement. The City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity of cultures, languages, faiths, identities, landscapes and stories. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. These intersecting and overlapping community stories form Casey's collective identity and contribute to its evolving rich history. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I'd like to introduce my colleague panel members. To start with, Mr. Boardman.
Yes, good afternoon everybody watching, and good afternoon Chair and Mr. Belmar.
Thank you. Mr. Belmar.
Good afternoon.
So we have item 2, confirmation of minutes. Is there a mover and seconder to confirm the meeting of Council held on the 16th of June 2020?
Yes, I'll move that.
Moved Mr. Belmar.
Seconded.
Seconded Mr. Boardman. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 3, declaration of interests. I have considered my obligations under section 79 of the Local Government Act 1989 and declare no conflict of interest relevant to any items on this afternoon's agenda. I also note that no officers have declared a conflict. Do my colleague administrators have any conflict to declare?
I have nothing to declare.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar.
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Mr. Boardman. Item 4, public question time. There are no public questions received for this afternoon's council meeting. So I move on to officers' reports. We only have the one report this afternoon, and that is item 5.1, the draft budget for 2021, Strategic Resource Plan 2024 and the Council Action Plan 2021. And we have a recommendation so forth. So can I request a mover for that report?
I will move the recommendations, and I'd like to speak to the recommendations if I could,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Boardman. Seconder?
I'll second.
Mr. Belmar, would you like to speak, Mr. Boardman?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I note that this is a significant council meeting for a number of reasons, notwithstanding that it is just over a week until the end of the financial year, and there is a legislative and a fiduciary responsibility for ourselves as administrator to pass the budget so that the council can meet its obligations and liabilities. But it's also just on a month from when I was appointed and from when Mr. Belmar was appointed. And why that is important is that the documents that we are discussing this afternoon first went on to public exhibition on the 5th of May. And on the 5th of May, I still had absolutely no idea that I was going to be in this position. And it is fair to acknowledge that before documents such as these go through any degree of consultation or public exhibition phase, there has been an enormity of work concluded up to that particular point in time. And I preface my comments by saying that it would be downright irresponsible of me, and certainly without speaking on behalf of Mr. Belmar, but for ourselves to come in at this late juncture and try to either re-engineer or to in any way influence what has been a significant, very well thought through and comprehensive process. But I want to make some comments around my observations of this process and of the municipality and the organisation by way of giving it a financial context. And there's really four things that you look at when you join any organisation, you take on board this type of challenge. You want to have a look at the organisation's balance sheet. You want to have a look at the sustainability of the business model, particularly the revenue model. You want to have a look at efficacy as it applies to the expenditure and how the operating aspects of the business have degrees of cost effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability and value for money principles inherent in all of their aspects. And then you look at the capability and the culture of the business to ensure that all of the above align, and that mantras around high performance and being well and truly acting in the interests of the organisation's key stakeholders, in this case being the Casey community, are not just slogans, that they are intrinsic within the organisation itself. And my observation as being here for just over a month is that despite the challenges that are not just being present in the Casey municipality, but the challenges that confront the local economy, the state economy, the national economy, for that matter, the international economy, that this organisation is absolutely highly performing and meeting all of its community and other obligations. And I say this because I have been quite impressed with the thoroughness of its consultation, with the professionalism that its staff and its leadership has undertaken to ensure that there is this process of transparency. There is this process of deep engagement as best as possible with the community to try and have feedback and open communication flows to influence some of the decisions that we as administrators are going to make, and that we are well informed, that we can be confident that the information presented to us is accurate, it is timely, and that we are acting in the best interests of the community and meeting our obligations. And I made a point when I read the budget papers that the starting principle for this financial year, because of the very unique and challenging environment that we confront ourselves in, should be avoiding any increase to any fees, charges or rates as best as possible. And I don't think that there would be a person in this organisation that would disagree with that, because we do find ourselves in a situation where there is great uncertainty for what not just the local economy looks like, but what the national and international economy looks like. And my colleague Mr Belmar will talk about the Consumer Price Index and what the general economic aspect looks like, but I want to make two references as an umbrella type of reference before I get into some more detailed discussions and points around this particular budget. If we look at the March quarter as it relates to the wage price index, there has been a year-on-year increase of about 2.1%. There has been a quarterly increase across all sectors, notwithstanding some of the challenges that are confronted by the COVID lockdown and economic aspects, of around about 0.5%. And whilst the RBA governor makes various comments around wage growth pressures and that we aren't investing in either particularly our private sector capacity and trying to get greater productivity and efficiencies from working hours to hopefully to have a capital return as a consequence, the figures do suggest that even up to the end of the March quarter, that wages were tracking okay. But we're well beyond the March quarter. And if we look at where the RBA has given their update, particularly as it relates to the effects on economic activity as a consequence of the COVID aspects, that the contraction in GDP could be anything between 10 and 12%. But what is actually most noting and disturbing, and I think relevant to us, is that the total hours worked will be expected to decline from around about 20%, and unemployment rate, particularly as it relates to permanent employment, will equally decline significantly. So we look at this in a Casey context of around about, as I can estimate, 90 to 100,000 employees, 25,000 businesses in this municipality, all of whom are going to have some financial challenges. We could find ourselves in a situation in the not too distant future where there would be an additional, and I say an additional, 5 to 10,000 unemployed people in this municipality alone. And that itself is going to be an incredible challenge for us, and it's going to be an incredible challenge for governments at all levels. So when this journey commenced, which was January, and the planning cycle was well underway at that stage, it was a very different environment. And the council had a forward agenda. There was numerous projects, capital works, other investments, other initiatives that the organisation wanted to undertake, and the forecasts around what was a financial environment at that stage was perfectly sound. And then we move forward a matter of weeks, not months, and we are in a completely opposite environment. But the positives around the City of Casey, there's a very strong balance sheet, there is a sustainable business model, there is a very forward, quite specific and I would say almost intuitive capital works program to really try and improve some of the municipal environmental and other facilities to improve community amenity and just standard of livings. That has to be looked through the lens of these are not short-term issues. These require a significant degree of planning, a significant degree of understanding and research, and it is not something that simply can be adjusted on a whim or through a short-term basis. And by doing that, I need to make a couple of references to some of the submissions, and I do compliment Mr Brian Oates from the Casey Residents and Ratepayers Association on a very well thought through, comprehensive, researched, well argued submission that was consistent with a number of the other submissions around the suggested rate freeze. We note in this budget that that's not the case. Rates will increase for the next financial year by 2%, in line with not just the state government cap, but what has been exhibited and communicated publicly. And whilst that in a revenue sense might look like a relatively small number considering the quantum of the Casey budget, and it's about 12 million, we would then have to go through a process of identifying $12 million of savings. There's been an argument around the way we could offset some of our cash assets. I mean, we could repurpose some of our financial resources into that savings. But that has, not from a governance perspective being just very bad practice, but it creates a precedent that every time we have a revenue hit, which undoubtedly will occur in the next financial year, we'll just repurpose our savings. That is absolutely off the table. It is not going to happen because we need to look at this business from a very long-term sustainable future. So what other options would be available to us? Well, we could go through staff reduction, we could go through service reduction, we could look at varying our capital works budget to try and offset some issues there, all of which have correlatory effects on all of the above. And one thing that I really want to note and acknowledge the work of Glenn and his team, which I think is an exemplar, is that Casey has taken a very strong position on not reducing any of its staff whatsoever. And in this environment where you'll find a very large percentage of the people who work in this organisation be local, it would be absolutely detrimental to all of the aspects we're talking about to even consider putting one people in the unemployment queue. There's also been an increase in the full-time headcount from a simple proposition of taking a number of the casual employees and turning them into full-time employees, giving them contracts. And I support that because one of the greatest gifts that you can do is to actually give someone a full-time job. And there's no doubt that by giving the confidence, ensuring that there is some degree of consumer activity as the largest employer in the municipality, that we are directly contributing to economic output ourselves. So what do we do from a service reduction basis? Well, I've gone through these papers in detail and I can't really identify anything that would be in any way justified to try and reduce services. Now, I know Mr Oates made a point around potentially looking at this facility, Bunjil, and some of its arts and cultural programs. And I have to strongly rebut that because I think in the environment that we are currently facing, to have focus on community amenity, to have focus on some of the cultural and leisure activities that really are going to be significantly in demand when lockdown discontinues, then this facility needs to be part of the overall recovery. And I do not in any way endorse, nor would I support service reductions from a leisure, arts or cultural basis. And then from a capital works perspective, as I said, these are not short-termisms. This is not something that's being decided over weeks or months. These are things that have got a forward projection planning basis of years. And for $131 million of directly beneficial capital works that will contribute to amenity improved services of this municipality, we need to see this, that it's not only having that benefit to the community, but it is generating economic activity, which is absolutely critical in this current environment. But some of the other factors that we are faced with at the moment is that we're not getting a return on our investments. Interest rates are practically zero. There's depreciation of our assets as we have to go through a significant revaluation process, and that's going to have an impact upon our rateable base. We've got long-term contracts, particularly as it relates to recreational management, waste collection, that really there isn't a mechanism for reevaluation. There's probably some things that we can look at. But the most important thing that we need to do as a municipality is to ensure that we continue to provide these services at a high standard that the community expects. And I would not in any way be supporting that we would be looking to renegotiate contracts where there seems to be a very high level of satisfaction from the community from what those contracts actually are. So whilst this is a budget that does have some pressures on it, I do want to be very forthright around Resolution 10 that we are passing today in regards to recognising that there is going to be hardship, that there is going to be people that will need either time or other considerations or whatever the situation is to review their rate situation, and that we are going to freeze the interest on outstanding rates, and we are not going to be pursuing any recovery actions until later in this year. And whilst later in the year we've set a date of 30 September and then October, we need to review that as well, because as I've forecast, the economic outlook is not rosy. There are going to be more hiccups. There is going to be a whole lot more cost, revenue and other broader economic factors that are going to impact upon all of us, not just here in Casey, but in the whole country. And our role as administrators are to ensure that we are on top of that and we are providing you with transparent and fair recommendations and outcomes. I said to you in my opening comments, my first public council meeting, that you may not agree with every decision we make, and this may not necessarily be one of those decisions you agree with, but we will be absolutely transparent in the reasons for that. And the simple reason why we need to pass this budget today in its current format is that if we start tinkering at the edges and looking at savings and looking at repurposing or reappropriation or whatever that is going to have a deleterious effect in the future. And our commitment must be to continue to provide the high level of services that this Casey Council and community expects for not just this financial year, but subsequent financial years. So with those comments, Chair, and to my colleague Mr Belmar, I do move that we adopt the budget. I am absolutely satisfied, and I do commend the extensive and hard work of all of the council team in putting together this financial document in a very, very trying circumstance, and also for them to not just ensure that we have communicated our reasons as effectively, we have sought feedback, we have consulted as widely as possible, but we will continue to do that, and the principles that we talk about around how we arrive at our decisions are principles that we adhere by with every day of our activities and our administration. I'm very pleased to move this document.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you. Budgets are inherently moral documents. They're moral documents because they inform the reader as to what an organisation holds as important. And as my fellow administrator, Mr Boardman, has set out, what this council holds as important are the services that it provides, and it wants to continue to provide them at the highest possible level. I want to take the opportunity to speak in support of the budget and support its adoption. As a council, we have a carriage of responsibility for $5 billion of assets and a proposed budget of $536 million, spanning $131.6 million in capital works and $405 million in an operating budget. It is a significant responsibility to deliver services to the public and raise revenue through rates, charges, fees and fines. It brings focus and deliberation around assuring ourselves and our community that there's been careful and measured steps in how we manage and assess our performance and demonstrate the value that the organisation provides to the community. And I won't repeat what Mr Boardman has said, but this is clearly a thorough process that has gone into producing this budget. The economic context in which this material has been put forward for our consideration reminds us that the challenges at the moment are as follows. Australia's GDP for the March quarter contracted by 0.3%. The June quarter economic impact is shaping to be far more severe than we have seen currently. The unemployment rate is expected to peak at 10%, and that is critically profound at Casey. The CPI, which measures inflation, was 2.2% in March 2020, but that was affected by consumer stockpiling behaviour, with the Reserve Bank highlighting considerable uncertainty in housing, fuel and employment markets. We are also at historic lows for interest rates, so there is a practical limit on the ability for monetary policy to stimulate the economy. The Commonwealth Government's fiscal settings, investment, JobKeeper, job seeker payments and tax concessions are seeking to positively influence growth. I also note that the population of Casey continues to grow. Therefore, the expectation has been set by the City of Casey that it will maintain a strong commitment to the sustainable management of resources. The City of Casey's budget settings will ensure that service delivery conditions support the community through the continued provision of essential services and infrastructure delivery, while resetting operating expenditure within more constrained parameters than what has been previously forecast. In approving this budget, Council very clearly expects that management will ensure that the 2021 employee costs will be within the levels allowed for in the budget as a minimum, with the expectation to drive efficiencies. This will be achieved in part through the setting of employment conditions through the next DBA process in a manner that is reflective of the community's expectations of public officers and the continual review of services and operating models. Throughout the year, management will advise Council on the progress being made on the sustainable approach to financial management. And as Mr. Boardman has said, this is the first of the budget that he and myself as administrators and also the chair have been involved in, and we did come in when this process was well on its way. And I look forward to being more deeply involved in future budget settings. I also want to acknowledge that there's been a considerable interest from the public in the budget, with many downloading information from our Casey Conversation website or using the interactive map to review capital works. I would also like to thank each of the 25 individuals and organisations that made public submissions and confirm that they were each actively considered by Council and officers. And I just want to make short mention of a couple of them. Firstly, Mr. Mirsad Selimovic, who made a submission to us about a playground in Green Valley Crescent Reserve, and that was considered by council officers in its budget setting, and ultimately no amendments have been made to the budget, but the considerations that came into play were the fact that there is continual work being done at that reserve, that it is a local reserve and that there are other district level facilities nearby, and that council has to use its resources wisely on the resources that more people will be using. The second submission I'd like to reflect on is the one made by Casey Basketball and Casey Netball Association, and in their submission they sought a consideration for the COVID impact on their offerings. And the City of Casey accepts a proposal that for a 6-month period from 1 July to 31 December 2020, the City of Casey will not charge Casey Netball and Casey Basketball for the rent of the court for a mandated 20-minute cleaning break between games. Now again, that is a thoroughly responsible thing to do in the context of responding to community need in the context of the COVID impact. And the third submission I'd like to briefly reflect on was one made by Mr. Jewell, who raised a submission regarding bushfire risk and the footprint of bushfire risk. And again, as administrators, we've been informed by council officers of the continuing work that is done by council on this issue, and we've been provided with a thorough response that informs me and satisfies me that clearly this is a matter that this council takes obviously very seriously and has been informed carefully by its officers about each of the matters that Mr. Jewell raised. And there is at this stage no reason to make any changes to the budget on that point, but certainly the work is being done to address the issue that was raised. Finally, I want to thank all the officers involved in preparing the material before us and thank them for their commitment, passion and rigour in making the City of Casey Australia's most livable. It's a bold ambition and one that we should continue to strive for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And thank you, both of you, for the comprehensive work that you've done in reviewing the material, in hearing the budget submissions and your analysis of it, and the comments that you've built around that in response this afternoon. I too support the recommendation to adopt the budget, and just make a few brief comments with respect to the contents of the budget and the program that we've undertaken. As both Mr Boardman and Mr Belmar outlined, the rigorous process that occurs around this budget process has been made very clear to us. It's a very comprehensive, diverse and complex budget that we're considering tonight. And I think we saw that in terms of the breadth of the submissions that the community made, that we both read and listened to a couple of weeks ago. The scope of issues that were covered in those submissions is just a small example of the diversity of services and programs that the council undertakes each and every day in the community. Everything from, as you mentioned, Mr Belmar, the sporting organisations through to playgrounds to bushfire management, sporting and leisure facilities, gambling issues, etc. And we do, once again, and I join with both my colleague administrators in saying thank you to people for that submission process and for the overview that you've given us of those issues that affect you in your local community. This afternoon is also about the adoption of our council plan for the final year of the 2017 to 21 council plan. And I think it's fair to say that as a panel of administrators, we do embrace the strategic objectives that have been clear in that council plan adopted by the former council. But the particular actions that people will be interested in, and it's a very detailed document, but there are some very important actions that we will undertake in the next year with respect to the priorities that we have in leading the community through what has been an overworked phrase, I know, but unprecedented times, and they certainly continue in Victoria as we speak today. It's important in our role that we continue to administer the city in a most efficient way, but also ensuring that we work with the needs of the community. And the journey that we are on as a panel of administrators has really just begun in understanding the dimension and depth of that. However, there are some critical capital works that will continue in the course of the next year, and it's worth just mentioning a few and assisting people's understanding of the dimension of cost of some of these projects. For example, the continued construction of Hardy's Road intersection and stage 1 of roadworks from Clyde Road to Tuckers Road is $9.6 million. The continued construction of new district-level soccer and cricket facility at Botanic Ridge, Eastern Playing Fields, $7.8 million. The continued construction of a new district AFL cricket and netball facility at Livingston Estate in Cranbourne East, $3.8 million, and building and renewal upgrade works at the Strong Drive Children's Centre in Hampton Park, $1.33 million. Just a few examples of some of the commitments and the considerable cost. And as we heard in the submissions, people are actually wanting more. So it's our job to really listen to that and prioritise and consider where they fit into that strategic objective of the council. The other very important roles that are outlined in terms of the work plan in the coming year is the advocacy role that the council needs to play on behalf of this community. A community that is growing every day. I think the information that we get is 50 to 60 new babies being seen by maternal and child health services every week in this city. It's an enormous growth. And I think it's very important that the advocacy role we have to ensure that those growing suburbs are well serviced, adequately planned, and that we are able to have our strategic input into the development of those new suburbs is really important, and that's very clearly front and centre in that council plan. Notwithstanding all of that, we have to do all of these things and be very mindful, as both Mr Boardman and Mr Belmar have said, in terms of cost management. And whilst we are in a strong position financially. That can diminish very, very quickly, particularly when you have unprecedented pressures such as we've experienced and we are still experiencing in terms of the impact of COVID-19. So most importantly, I think the strong focus that the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Patterson, and the executive team have brought to this year's budget have been a strong focus on looking at ensuring that salary and wages, which are the biggest part of our expenditure, are kept in hand, and that discretionary expenditure of all types has been highly scrutinised, as well as ensuring we're in a position to support a very strong commitment to capital works. With those comments, I just want to conclude by thanking the team here for the work that they've done. It's no mean feat to bring new people up to speed with what is a very complex and diverse budget and set of services. So I do want to pass on my appreciation to the CEO and to the executive team and all of the other management staff and team leaders that have contributed to that, and also to the community for the contribution they've made in terms of submissions and highlighting their issues to us. So thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder, and I put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That's the conclusion of officer reports. We have item 6, consideration of reports of committees, and for that purpose I simply note the record of assembly of councillors as listed in the agenda papers. Item 7, petitions. We have received one petition with 13 signatures. That's at item 7.1 in the agenda, which is regarding nature strip trees on Silvertop Close, Limbrook, and there's a recommendation for which I seek a mover. Do I have a move for that recommendation? Mr Belmar moved and seconded. Mr Boardman, and that recommendation is the item be referred to the City Presentation Department for response. I put that to the vote. Carried unanimously. And item 8, urgent business. There's no urgent business this afternoon, and that leaves me one task, and that is item 9, to close the meeting this afternoon. And thank you for those who are watching. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.